It was a cold, foggy evening when Ethan pulled his car into the cracked parking lot of Ravenhill Asylum. The massive, crumbling structure loomed before him, shrouded in mist. Thick vines curled up its broken facade, and shattered windows stared back at him like hollow eyes. The asylum had been abandoned for decades, but it had gained a reputation as a place where dark things happened. Stories of ghostly whispers and people who vanished without a trace. Ethan didn't believe in the paranormal. He was here for one thing only: haunting visuals for his urban decay photography project. Ethan slung his camera over his shoulder and stepped inside. The asylum greeted him with silence. Dust hung in the air like ash, settling on every surface. The floor creaked beneath his feet as he moved through the dim corridors. He inhaled the scent of mildew and rot, his breath fogging up in the chilled air. The asylum was a time capsule of despair. Rusted gurneys, overturned wheelchairs, and shattered medical equipment scattered like debris from a forgotten nightmare. He clicked his camera, capturing the decaying beauty of peeling paint and broken tiles. The flash illuminated the darkness, momentarily banishing the shadows that lurked in every corner. As he moved deeper, he noticed faint graffiti scrawled on the walls. "Don't look behind you." He chuckled under his breath. Urban legends made good stories, but they didn't scare him. In one of the back hallways, Ethan pushed open a door marked Records Room. Inside, shelves buckled under the weight of rotting patient files. Mold crept along the spines of forgotten histories. He picked up a yellowed file at random, the paper brittle in his hands. It told the story of a man institutionalized in the 1940s for hysteria after witnessing his family's murder. Ethan shivered but kept reading, fascinated by the grim details. Then he found it. A file unlike the others. It was pristine. The leather cover was untarnished, the paper crisp as if untouched by time. The name on the file read Silas Ashbourne. His brow furrowed. He had never heard of that name before. He flipped it open and scanned the contents. The details were cryptic. A chill ran down his spine. There was no discharge date, no death certificate. It was as if Silas had simply remained. The complex association that Silas had made with his departed wife returned their family to a house that reminded them. As he turned the page, a sudden sound broke the silence, a faint whisper. "Ethan." He froze, the hairs on his neck rising. He turned sharply, but there was nothing there. He scanned the darkened room, his heart thudding. "Hello?" he called out, his voice trembling. The room answered with silence. He shook his head. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you." He stuffed the file into his bag and backed out of the room. But as he walked down the hall, he heard it again, soft footsteps echoing behind him. He spun around, but all he saw was the empty corridor stretching into darkness. Gluk! His pulse quickened. He picked up his pace, his footsteps now matching the hurried rhythm of his heartbeat. The whisper returned, closer this time. "Ethan, come find me." He didn't remember turning down another hallway, but there he was, standing before a door that seemed untouched by the decay of time. It was smooth, polished, and whole, a stark contrast to the ruin around it. The nameplate above it read, Ashbourne. His hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob. Locked. The whisper grew louder, morphing into a low, guttural moan. He took a step back, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, but something compelled him to stay. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small crowbar, and pried at the door. With a final crack, the lock gave way. The door swung open, revealing a room that seemed frozen in time. Dust coated the floor, but everything else was intact. A wooden chair sat in the center, its armrests marred with deep claw marks. Leather restraints hung loosely from its sides. In the corner of the room, something moved. He raised his camera, the flash illuminating the figure. It was humanoid but grotesque. Its limbs were twisted, its skin a pallid leathery gray. Hollow eyes stared back at him, and its mouth, oh God, its mouth gaped open in a silent scream. The flash dimmed, plunging the room into darkness again. Then it moved. Ethan stumbled backward, his camera slipping from his grasp. He turned to run, but the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. He pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Behind him, the moaning grew louder, rising into a crescendo of agony. He didn't look back. His fingers fumbled in the dark until he found his flashlight. He flicked it on just as the figure lurched toward him, its skeletal hand reaching out. The light flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. The whispers returned, filling the room like a chorus of the damned. "Stay with me, Ethan. Don't leave." "They all left me." The walls began to shift, the very structure of the asylum warping around him. Doors vanished, corridors twisted, and the ceiling seemed to close in. He was trapped in a maze of madness. He could feel it, breathing down his neck. Somehow he broke free. He didn't know how long he ran, minutes, hours, before he burst through the front door and into the cold night air. He collapsed on the steps, gasping for breath, his heart pounding like a hammer against his ribs. When he finally looked back, the asylum stood silent and still. No lights, no movement. But his camera had recorded everything. The police found it the next day, lying in the weeds near the asylum's entrance. The last photograph showed a blurred skeletal figure with hollow eyes staring directly at the lens. Ethan was never seen again. Raven Ridge Asylum had always been a place shrouded in darkness, both literal and metaphorical. Perched miles from the nearest town, the ruins of the old psychiatric hospital whispered tales of torment, inhumane experiments, and restless spirits. For years, locals dared each other to visit, but few ever did. It was the perfect setting for urban explorers chasing internet fame. That's exactly what brought Alex, Jordan, Sarah, and Damien there one cold October night. Alex, the self-perceived leader, had a taste for danger and adrenaline. His YouTube channel, Nightfall Adventures, thrived on the thrills of exploring abandoned places. Jordan, the camera operator, was quieter, more cautious, but loyal. Sarah, a firm believer in the paranormal, carried a bundle of sage for protection. Damien, the skeptic, thought it was all a joke and scoffed at Sarah's rituals. When they arrived, the asylum stood like a decaying corpse, skeletal remains of brick and steel. The moonlight cast long shadows across the crumbling facade, giving the building an almost sentient appearance. Vines strangled the walls, and broken windows gaped like empty eye sockets. "Ready to make some history?" Alex grinned as he pulled out a crowbar. "Theoretically, yes. In practice, not," he said. "History of stupidity," Damien muttered, kicking a rusted can aside. So Jordan adjusted the camera. "Let's just get inside before someone calls the cops." They pried open the front door and stepped into a tomb of silence. Dust motes danced in the thin beam of their flashlights. The air smelled of mildew and decay. The entrance hall stretched before them, lined with overturned wheelchairs and shattered glass. Old medical posters, faded and torn, clung to the walls like forgotten memories. "Creepy as hell," Sarah whispered. "Perfect," Alex replied, his eyes gleaming. They moved deeper into the asylum, the floors creaking underfoot. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. The group filmed rooms filled with broken equipment and graffiti scrawled warnings, "Leave now," and "The Never Left." Damien laughed at each one. "People are so dramatic," he said, tapping a wall where red paint spelled, "Silence the Screams." And Jordan shuddered. "Yeah, it's just paint, right?" An hour into their exploration, they reached the heart of the asylum, the treatment wing. Sarah's flashlight flickered and she cursed under her breath. "You okay?" Alex asked. "Yeah, just the battery," I have a spare." As she swapped it out, a faint sound drifted through the hall. A low, anguished wail. Everyone froze. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. "Wind," Damien scoffed. "Wind doesn't sound like screaming," Jordan muttered, gripping his camera tighter. They moved toward the sound, their flashlights cutting narrow paths through the dark. The hallway stretched on forever, lined with doors that led into small, empty rooms. Each step felt heavier, the air thick with unseen weight. The screaming grew louder. At the end of the hall, they found a door slightly ajar. Alex pushed it open. The room beyond was empty, save for a rusted gurney. Chains dangled from the walls and dark stains marred the floor. In one corner, a small hole had been carved into the wall, the same gray as the floor beneath. Ella peeked under the gurney. "What's that?" Jordan asked, peering closer. The hole was just large enough for a hand to fit through. "Looks like someone tried to break through," Alex said. He leaned in, shining his flashlight. "Weird." Sarah felt her skin crawl. "Let's keep moving." They turned to leave, but Damien lingered, staring at the hole. He chuckled and reached his hand inside. "Damien, don't!" Sarah snapped. He wiggled his fingers. "Come on, it's just a..." A sudden snap echoed through the room. Damien yelped, yanking his hand back. His fingers were bleeding. "Something bit me," he shouted, cradling his hand. Alex stared at the hole, his face pale. "There's nothing in there." Damien swore, wrapping his hand in a bandana. "I'm telling you, something grabbed me." Sarah lit a bundle of sage, the acrid smoke filling the room. "We need to leave, now." The screaming returned, louder, closer. They ran. The hallways twisted as if alive, leading them in circles. Doors that had been open were now closed. Their flashlights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Panic set in as the walls seemed to breathe. "Exercise 2. "Where's Damien?" Jordan whispered. They spun around. He was gone. "Damien!" Alex shouted, his voice reverberating. A faint cry echoed back. It sounded like Damien, but distorted. "Wrong. Help me." They followed the voice, heartbeats hammering. It led them to another hole in the wall, larger this time. The screams came from within. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, backing away. Alex stepped closer, shining his light. The wall pulsed, a faint outline of a face pressing against it from the inside. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," he yelled. "Damien?" The face twisted in agony, mouth open in a silent scream. The walls swallowed it. Sarah screamed, dropping her flashlight. "It's in the walls!" They ran again, blind and desperate. Every corridor led them deeper into madness. The asylum seemed alive, its very structure shifting to trap them. Doors vanished, floors buckled, the walls groaned. "Get us out of here," Jordan cried. "There's no way out," Alex shouted back. The screaming filled their ears. Damien's voice twisted and overlapping with others, a chorus of agony. Suddenly, they burst into a large chamber. A rusted operating table sat in the center, chains hanging from the ceiling. Blood, long dried, stained every surface. Medical instruments lay scattered, cruel and sharp. A journal rested on a nearby stand. Alex grabbed it, flipping through brittle pages. The last entry read, "The walls hunger, the screams feed it, they must never stop." Behind them, the door slammed shut. The walls began to close in. Sarah sobbed, clutching her sage. "We're going to die here." "No!" Alex shouted, slamming his fists against the door. "We're getting out!" The walls rippled, faces pressing outward, distorted, screaming faces. Damien's was among them, his eyes wide with terror. "Help me!" Jordan dropped the camera as hands reached out from the walls, skeletal fingers clawing for flesh. He screamed as they dragged him backward. "Jordan!" Alex grabbed for him but missed. The walls swallowed him whole. Sarah collapsed, sobbing. "It's over. We're all going to..." A door opened behind them. Without thinking, Alex grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her through. They sprinted down a final corridor, light at the end growing brighter. The screams followed them, the walls stretching, reaching. They burst outside into the cold night air. The asylum loomed behind them, silent once more. Breathless, they collapsed on the ground. Alex looked back. The front door stood ajar. A faint whisper carried on the wind. "Come back." When the footage was reviewed later, the last frame showed Damien's face, eyes wide with terror, pressed against the wall. The screams had never stopped. In 1989, a local TV station aired a documentary titled Hollow Pines: The Lost History. The program was intended to reveal the dark secrets of the Hollow Pines Asylum, a notorious institution known for its unethical medical experiments. The asylum had been abandoned for years, and rumors of cruel treatments, mysterious disappearances, and unexplained occurrences had surrounded its name. However, halfway through the broadcast, the documentary was abruptly cut off, and the station claimed technical difficulties. No one knew what happened, but soon after, the crew involved in the project began to suffer bizarre mental breakdowns, or simply disappeared. The footage, once considered lost, was never shown again, and Hollow Pines Asylum faded from the public's memory. In 2023, journalist Alex Hamilton stumbled upon a dusty box labeled Hollow Pines Final Broadcast. Intrigued by the cryptic label, he couldn't resist watching the forgotten tape. Alone in the station screening room, he hit play, unaware of the terrifying journey ahead. The tape started with grainy black and white footage, distorted and filled with static. The screen flickered and the audio was muffled. An interview with an elderly woman, a former patient of the asylum, appeared. Her voice was shaky, but the words she spoke were chilling. "It wasn't the treatments," she whispered. "It was the place itself. The walls. They listen." Alex felt a chill run down his spine. The woman's eyes were wide, her gaze distant. Before he could process the meaning of her words, the tape cut to a former staff member. The man's hands shook as he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ward 13, we were told never to go in there," he muttered. "But we did. That's when everything changed." The screen cut to static, and the image vanished. The tape had abruptly ended, cutting off the crew member mid-sentence. Alex sat frozen, his mind racing. Why had it been pulled? What had they uncovered? What was Ward 13? He rewound the tape and played it again, but each time the footage cut off at the same point, leaving him with more questions than answers. Determined to find the truth, Alex tracked down surviving members of the documentary crew. Most had gone into hiding, their lives shattered by what they had witnessed at Hollow Pines. One crew member, now in a psychiatric facility, mumbled incoherently about the horrors of the asylum. Another had vanished without a trace. The few who remained wouldn't speak. But one journal, found in a dusty corner of an old storage unit, revealed something Alex couldn't ignore. The journal was filled with frantic scribbles, but one entry stood out. "The halls listen, never speak the names." Night after night, Alex pored over the journal. It became an obsession. The more he read, the more he was drawn to the asylum's dark past. The nightmares began soon after. He dreamt of long, dark hallways that seemed to stretch on forever. The air grew thicker with each step. Figures with blurred faces appeared at the edges of his vision, always just out of reach, but their eyes, they followed him. The sun had set when they never blinked. The whispers started too, faint at first, like a breeze, but as the days went on they grew louder. In his sleep, in his waking hours, he could hear them, calling his name, beckoning him to Hollow Pines. Stop! He began to see strange things in his apartment. Shadows moved when they shouldn't. His reflection in the mirror looked different, warped, like someone else was staring back at him. He could hear the whispers in the walls, the soft scratching, as if something was trying to get in. The line between nightmare and reality started to blur. Alex knew he was slipping, but the draw of Hollow Pines was too strong. He had to know what happened there. He had to know what had driven the crew to madness. Through his research, Alex discovered more about Dr. Alaric Westmore, the asylum's lead psychiatrist. Westmore was infamous for his experiments on sensory deprivation, using patients in isolated tanks to induce hallucinations and mental breakdowns. But there were rumors of even darker practices, things that went far beyond the realm of conventional psychiatry. And at the center of it all was Ward 13, a part of the asylum that had been sealed off for years. The stories surrounding Ward 13 were nightmarish. Patients sent there were never seen again, and the staff who ventured inside often came back changed, their minds shattered. Some said the ward